I think, frankly, it started with this serious talk of Macron and Starmer about putting European NATO country boots on the ground in Ukraine. I think Russia, I don't take it that seriously, but Russia does.
Ukraine's President Zelensky knows better than almost anyone about the dangers of modern weaponry, and he warned the UN General Assembly yesterday about the risks to the whole world of drones, which could soon be controlled by AI. He said we were engaged in the most destructive arms race in history. He painted a picture of Russia picking off its neighbours one by one, Georgia, Belarus, Moldova, and said there was no choice but to fight. Let's speak now to Steve Erlanger, Chief Diplomatic Correspondent in Europe for the New York Times, regular on this programme. Morning, Steve.
Good morning.
We're a day after, well, 2 days after the dramatic Trump intervention. We've now heard from Zelensky. Has anything actually realistically changed? Is the situation with the war in Ukraine, the Western view of Russia, has that actually changed in any material way?
I don't see that, no. I see a lot of rhetoric, but that's what the UN is all about. Trump has basically said he's kind of willing to wash his hands of the war in Ukraine and the boys can keep fighting it out. Some Trump people suggest this is a negotiating tactic on the part of the great negotiator, but it's hard to see how calling Russia a paper tiger is going to bring an end to the war. The Russian spokesman Peskov said the other day, "We're a bear, not a tiger. Nobody's ever heard of a paper bear." So I don't expect that embarrassing Putin this way is going to bring him to the table. What will bring him to the table is pressure, and Trump is clearly unwilling to actually do that. So no, I don't think much has changed. I think Zelensky is, right to be encouraged. He had a decent chat with Trump. Trump seems to admire Zelensky now rather than thinking of him as a fly to be swatted out of the way. But materially, to the point of your question, I think the question's quite accurate, and the answer is not much.
The rhetoric is more bellicose now, though, isn't it? I mean, Zelensky's entitled to be as bellicose as he likes. He's actually at war and has been at war for the last 3 years. But you just feel that Russian incursions into airspace increasing. Trump says he would probably support shooting down Russian planes that go into the wrong airspace. Poland says they definitely would do it. We've seen NATO engagement with drones. Is there a danger that we're sort of talking ourselves collectively closer to some form of belligerence?
I think things are getting tight. It's true. And I think, frankly, it started with this serious talk of Macron and Starmer about putting European NATO country boots on the ground in Ukraine. I think Russia, I don't take it that seriously, but Russia does.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole point of fighting the war is to keep Ukraine out of NATO and into the Russian sphere where it used to be. And so if the point of the end of the war is to invite NATO troops into Ukraine, that's not something Russia wants. And I think part of what Russia's doing is sending messages, warning messages. It's very good at this, by the way, which is messages that are short of war, that are hybrid. They're playing with elections, they're playing with social media, and they're testing NATO's air defenses, partly testing Poland's air defenses, flanking countries to indicate that they're not going to sit on their hands. That's at least the way I interpret it.
Yeah, and with all of this, of course, there's the nuclear threat, isn't there? That means that most sensible people would push war back very, very far between NATO countries and Russia, particularly between the US and Russia, between countries like France and Britain and Germany. There is this question that ultimately this other threat exists, which makes war, actual overt hot war, implausible, doesn't it?
Well, it does, but it also makes hybrid war very plausible.
Yeah.
And that's the point, because no one wants to press the button because the button is inconceivable. And it is a very good deterrent, but it does allow a lot of maneuvering and, frankly, a lot of hybrid combat and low-level combat underneath. NATO doesn't want to go to war against Russia. Russia doesn't want to go to war against NATO. But it also raises the question of American troops in Europe. The Trump people are going through process of thinking through force posture in that horrible phrase. In other words, where American troops will sit.
Yeah.
And the Europeans, particularly the Eastern Europeans, definitely want to keep American troops there because the connection between Article 5 and the nuclear guarantee is American troops on the ground. If
Yeah.
American troops aren't there, then it's far less likely in a war that America will actually come to NATO's aid, particularly with nuclear weapons.
It's such an interesting point that you're making. In a way that nuclear weapons sort of define the point past which no one will go. But what that opens up is everything up to that point, and in some ways it makes that more likely because there's a sort of agreed area where combat can take place. Maybe it's cyber, maybe it's drones, maybe it's intervening in airspace when it comes to NATO countries, maybe it would be something a bit further than that, but we know the point past which it will not go.
Well, that's right. And of course, what's changed is, in the old days, the good old Cold War days, I mean, all these battles were fought out in third countries. They were proxy wars,
Yeah.
right? Ethiopia and Cuba and places like that.
Vietnam.
And not, yeah, and Vietnam, to be sure. But what you have now is a Russia which is revisionist, a Russia which is pressing on European borders. So this kind of underneath nuclear battling is much closer to home, and I think is much more dangerous because you get the Poles who have their own domestic political problems to deal with. They can't look weak. No one wants to look weak. And of course, it is true that earlier in the war, Russia, according to American intelligence, was very much considering using a tactical nuclear weapon. And Biden sent the CIA director, then Bill Burns, to Moscow directly to warn his counterpart that if that happened, Russia would no longer have a navy.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Before you go, and one line from Zelensky that sort of leapt out to me. He said, God saved Trump from a murder attempt during the campaign. And on this program, we're quite interested in the sort of the rise of religion in politics. I find it absolutely fascinating. And it almost suggests to me, and you might call me a grotesque atheist cynic, and you'd be right, Steve. But in order to get...
I'm not sure grotesque.
Okay, bless your heart for that. But in order to get on in this world, you almost have to either believe in magic or say you believe in magic. It feels that's... we used to say we don't do God in politics in Britain, but it just feels that the American influence is getting everywhere, and there's a kind of rise of religiosity in politics. And it's just shocked that Zelensky was playing that particular game as well in the UN speech.
Yes, particularly for someone who is Jewish, after all.
Yeah.
It was a bit odd, I have to say. But you're right. But of course, America has always been a very religious nation. People go to church, right? People go to synagogue. It's still very true. And look at Charlie Kirk. They're making him into a martyr.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very religious in terms of the way people talk about this poor guy who was killed, and everyone thinks the killing's a tragedy. But, Trump is turning him into a kind of Republican Jesus figure.
Yeah.
And that's partly the same tone that Zelensky's hitting,
Yeah.
which is to appeal to America's deep belief in some, higher authority.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, really. And we're sort of edging there day by day by day, and it's become such an orthodoxy that Zelensky's now saying that, and no one really sort of bats an eye and think, oh yeah, God saved Trump, didn't he? And if you actually pause to think about that, that's a kind of a crazy position to become a consensus. But that's where we've got to.
Well, it's true, but it's also true that Trump believes that God saved him.
Does he though? Does he, or does he just say?
Well, he thinks so. I mean, he's someone who. I mean, this is part of the problem. He thinks God's blessings upon him, and so he can do whatever he wants.
Yeah, it's an interesting world we live in now, Steve. Great to speak to you.